Hello, I'm Sylvia Knight, Head of Education at the Royal Meteorological Society. In this series of short films, we're covering some of the background information that geography teachers may find useful if they're teaching weather and climate at secondary level. This is linked to the Weather and Climate Teaching Guide with accompanying classroom resources which you can find on our website, MetLink. In this film, I'll be looking at climate zones. The Köppen-Geiger classification system is the most commonly used system for categorising climates. It divides the world into 5 main climate groups depending on the seasonal temperature and precipitation patterns. A is tropical climates, B dry ones, C temperate, D continental and E polar climates. Because it takes into account not only the annual temperature and precipitation patterns but also the annual cycles of both, it's usefully linked to biome distribution. This world map shows the countries classified according to the Köppen-Geiger classification but resized according to the population size of the country. So it clearly shows which climate types support the greatest populations. The climate zones themselves are closely linked to the global atmospheric circulation, which we looked at in the last film. For a full definition of the classification system, you can see, for example, Wikipedia, but we're going to focus on the main groups. Tropical or equatorial climates are home to the world's rainforests, where rainfall and humidity are high. They're linked to the seasonally migrating intertropical convergence zone. Temperatures are generally 25 to 35 degrees Celsius and vary little through the year. The dry or arid regions are linked to the high-pressure, cloud-free belts at the edges of the Hadley cells. Cold ocean currents can contribute to reduced availability of rainfall. The temperature range in subtropical deserts can be large, regularly exceeding 45 degrees Celsius by day in summer and often falling to below freezing overnight in winter. Mediterranean climates vary seasonally and are linked to the descending air at the edges of the Hadley cells in summer and to the westerlies of the Ferrel cells in winter. So that gives them hot, dry summers and cooler, wetter winters. Far from the ameliorating effect of the oceans, continental climates are characteristic of the interior of large land masses, particularly in the mid-latitudes. The main distinguishing features are large annual and diurnal ranges of air temperature and low rainfall. Linked to the polar cell, polar climates can be subdivided into tundra and ice cap or frost, depending on whether the mean temperature of the warmest month is above or below 0 degrees Celsius. The Arctic climate is moderated by the relatively warm Atlantic Ocean, but in the Antarctic, the distance from the ocean and a source of water vapour can mean that it is truly too cold to snow. Temperate climate zones lie between the tropics and the polar circles in the westerlies of the Ferrel cell. The changes in these regions between summer and winter are generally subtle, from warm to cold rather than extreme, from hot to freezing cold. All temperate regions have 4 distinct seasons. However, a temperate climate can have very highly variable weather. One day it may be sunny, the next it may be raining. Temperate climate can have a maritime influence. Whereas climate change will not mean that all the climate zones simply shift polewards, they will of course change with a changing climate. Large shifts in the global distribution of Köppen-Geiger climate zones have been projected by the end of the century. This diagram shows how the pace of shifts in climate regions increases with global temperature, but it doesn't show how the location of those climates has shifted across the globe. A 2013 paper in Nature Climate Change suggested that for the initial 2 degrees Celsius of warming, globally about 5% of Earth's land area shifts to a new climate zone. The rate at which climate zones shift is about the same as the rate at which global temperatures increase, both of which are projected to become more rapid as we go into the future. The paper predicted that over the 21st century, frost climates largely decrease, some arid regions increase, a large fraction of land area changes from having cool summers to having hot summers, most northern mid-latitudes and polar latitudes undergo climate zone shifts, and there's less change in tropical regions, except in the mountain regions where there are projected changes in precipitation. The lead author, Irina Malstein, said, "A shift in the climate zone is probably a better measure of reality for living systems, more so than the changing global temperature by a degree or precipitation by a centimetre." As the speed of climate zone shift increases, the ability of species to adapt reduces and more extinctions can be expected. Some climate zones, particularly semi-arid ones, have been designated climate change hotspots. These are areas where strong physical and ecological effects of climate change come together with large numbers of vulnerable people and communities identified through the Sustainable Development Goals. There are many useful sources of data for the climate and biodiversity zones, some of which we've given in the text below. In the next film, we'll look at how and why the climate has changed in the past.